My fiancé said, "My ex is going to be my best woman. Accept it or the wedding's off." I smiled and said, "Okay." Then I hired a private investigator. What he found ended the wedding before the ceremony ever began. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 31 years old. For a long time, I thought I was one of the lucky ones. 4 years with the same man, a proposal, a wedding date, and a future that finally felt solid. Looking back now, the warning signs were already there. They just didn't arrive loudly. They came through small compromises, quiet excuses, and the same tired eye roll Ryan gave me whenever I questioned something he wanted. The night everything changed started like any other evening. Ryan and I were on the couch eating takeout, going over the wedding party list. The wedding was 2 months away. Deposits had been paid, flights had been booked, and both families were already treating the ceremony like a sealed deal. I was highlighting names when Ryan looked up from his phone. "Oh, I made a decision." I smiled. "About what?" "My best woman." I paused. "I thought your cousin was doing that." Ryan shook his head. "No, I've decided Ashley will do it." I stared at him. Ashley, the woman he'd dated for 3 years before me. I waited for the joke, but he wasn't smiling. "Your ex?" I asked. "Yeah." He shrugged, like we were discussing napkin colors. "It's becoming more common." "Ryan, that's not common." "It is." "Shh." "No, it isn't." He rolled his eyes, and something in me tightened. I knew that look too well. "Ashley knows me better than anyone," he said. The words hit harder than he expected. I slowly set down my fork. "Better than me?" Ryan sighed. "You know what I mean." "No, I really don't." "She understands the wedding stuff, the planning, the details, the emotional side." "I'm literally planning this wedding with you. You're making this into a bigger deal than it is." A cold feeling settled low in my stomach. It wasn't anger yet. It was that quiet warning your body gives you before your mind is ready to admit the truth. "When did you two get this close again?" I asked. Ryan hesitated just long enough for me to notice. "We've been talking more lately." "How much more?" He gave a small shrug. "Enough. Enough." That one word made every small thing from the past few months rearrange itself in my head. Ashley's name showing up on his phone, random calls, late replies, stories he repeated with a softness in his voice I had ignored because trusting him felt easier than questioning him. "I don't like this," I said. Ryan's face changed immediately. The warmth disappeared. "I wasn't asking permission." My chest tightened. "I'm your fiancé. And Ashley is my best friend." The room felt smaller after that. I looked at the man I was supposed to marry, the man who should have cared that this hurt me. Instead, he was defending his ex-girlfriend harder than he'd defended our relationship in months. "Pick someone else," I said. "No." "Ryan?" "No," his voice sharpened. "Accept it or the wedding's off." I stared at him, waiting for him to take it back. 8 months of planning. Tens of thousands of dollars. Family flights, vendor contracts, and 4 years together, and he was willing to risk all of it over Ashley. He didn't blink. Finally, I nodded. "Okay." His shoulders relaxed immediately. "Really?" I forced my mouth into something close to a smile. "Really?" He kissed my cheek. "Thank you, babe. You won't regret this." He went back to eating like nothing had happened. I sat there with my food untouched, barely hearing the rest of what he said, because one thought had started to grow in the back of my mind. What if this wasn't about Ashley being his best woman? What if Ashley was just the part of the problem I could finally see? That night, Ryan fell asleep almost as soon as his head hit the pillow. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the last 6 months in pieces. Every excuse, every late-night text, every unexplained smile when Ashley's name appeared on his screen. Around midnight, I slipped out of bed, walked into the kitchen, and searched for a private investigator. 3 hours later, I signed the contract. Before we ended the call, the investigator asked, "Do you think he's cheating?" I looked toward the bedroom where Ryan was sleeping peacefully, as if he hadn't just cracked something open between us. "I honestly don't know." The investigator was quiet for a beat. "The truth usually shows up faster than people expect," he said. After we hung up, I stood alone in the dark kitchen, listening to the refrigerator hum and my own heartbeat, realizing I wasn't trying to save my engagement anymore. I was trying to find out whether it had already ended. The next morning, I expected daylight to make me feel ridiculous. Instead, it made everything sharper. Ryan was in the kitchen making coffee when I came downstairs. He kissed my forehead and asked if I wanted breakfast. I almost convinced myself I had overreacted. Maybe hiring someone had been too much. Maybe wedding stress had gotten into my head. His phone lit up on the counter. Ashley. Ryan's expression changed before he even picked it up. Most people probably wouldn't have noticed, but after 4 years, I did. There was a softness there, a little spark. The kind of look people get when the right name appears on their screen. He typed back before pouring his coffee. That cold feeling returned. I went to work carrying it with me. The investigator called later that afternoon. I'll start today. I thanked him and hung up, but relief never came. All day I kept wondering whether I actually wanted answers, because a part of me already knew what I was afraid he would find. Over the next week, I became an actress in my own relationship. I smiled when Ryan talked about Ashley. I nodded when he mentioned their wedding planning meetings. I laughed at jokes I didn't find funny. Most importantly, I stopped asking questions. That seemed to make him happy, maybe too happy. A few days later, Ashley came over to our apartment. Officially, they were discussing bachelor and bachelorette party logistics. I sat across the room with my laptop open, pretending to answer emails while watching them move around each other with an ease that made my skin prickle. Their conversation flowed too smoothly. Inside jokes, shared memories, little references I wasn't part of. Ashley touched his arm while laughing, and Ryan didn't move away. Neither of them seemed to notice how natural it looked. Or maybe they did. After she left, Ryan stretched out on the couch. She's been a lifesaver through all this wedding stuff. I looked up from my computer. Really? Yeah, he smiled. You two would actually get along if you gave her a chance. The irony almost made me laugh. For the first time, I realized I wasn't worried about Ashley. I was worried about him. 3 days later, the investigator sent his first report. I opened the email during lunch. 4 photographs. Nothing dramatic at first glance. Ryan's car parked outside Ashley's apartment building at 2:17 p.m., and still there at 5:42 p.m. More than 3 hours. Ryan had told me he was meeting his cousin that afternoon to discuss wedding transportation. I checked my texts. The message was still there, plain as day. I kept searching for an explanation. Maybe there had been other people there. Maybe it really was innocent. Deep down, though, I knew I was reaching. The second report ended that. This time there were 12 photos. Ryan and Ashley at a coffee shop, laughing, leaning toward each other. In one image, their hands were touching across the table. It wasn't accidental, it wasn't brief, it was comfortable. The investigator had taken the pictures from multiple angles. There was no misunderstanding what I was seeing. I sat at my desk staring at the screen for nearly 20 minutes while people walked past my office, probably assuming I was reviewing spreadsheets. I was actually watching my future come apart one frame at a time. That night, Ryan came home with sunflowers. My favorite. The gesture should have made me happy. Instead, I wondered whether guilt had picked them out. "Everything okay?" he asked, setting them on the counter. I forced a smile. Why wouldn't it be? He studied me briefly, nodded, and let it go. That bothered me more than the flowers. If our places had been reversed, I would have kept asking. Ryan seemed relieved he didn't have to. 2 days later, the investigator called again. I have something more substantial. My stomach dropped. What happened? Hotel parking garage. I closed my eyes. When? Tuesday afternoon. Tuesday. Ryan had told me he was helping his brother move furniture. The photographs arrived while we were still on the phone. Ryan's car, Ashley's car, both entering the same parking garage, both leaving nearly 4 hours later. Another photo showed them walking into the hotel lobby together, his hand resting against her lower back. I knew that gesture. He used to guide me through crowded places that way. The investigator waited before asking, "Do you want me to stop?" Most people probably would have. Most people would have confronted him, canceled the wedding, and walked away. But this wasn't only cheating anymore. It was the manipulation. The way Ryan had made me feel unreasonable for noticing what was right in front of me. The way he'd forced me to accept Ashley's place in our wedding or lose everything. "No," I said. "Keep going." "You sure?" "Very." He exhaled quietly. People get careless when they think they've already won. After the call, I sat in my office looking out the window. Every new piece of evidence fit too neatly. Every lie connected to another lie. Every excuse to another secret. Cheating hurt. Betrayal hurt more. What stayed with me was realizing Ryan didn't seem afraid of being caught. He acted like the wedding was guaranteed, like I would never leave. That night, he fell asleep beside me while scrolling through his phone. Around midnight, a notification lit up the screen. Ashley's name appeared on the screen, followed by a heart emoji and a smiling face. Nothing explicit, nothing that would hold up as proof. But I saw the way he smiled before answering, and something inside me finally stopped fighting. Whatever was happening between them wasn't new. It wasn't confusion. It was a choice they had made over and over again. The next morning, another email arrived from the investigator. Attached was a screenshot of a text conversation he had managed to capture. I opened it expecting another secret meeting, another lie, another place Ryan had been when he wasn't with me. Instead, I found a conversation that made every hotel visit feel small. Ashley had written, "Can't wait until this wedding is over." Ryan replied, less than a minute later, "2 more months, then everything gets easier." Ashley sent a laughing emoji. "And Claire?" Ryan's answer followed immediately. "She'll be fine. Once the divorce settlement happens, we'll have enough to start over." I read it once, then again. By the third time, my hands were cold. The office moved around me like nothing had happened. Phones rang. Someone laughed near the break room. People walked past my door carrying coffee and paperwork, while my entire future collapsed inside one text thread. Until that moment, a small part of me had still been looking for an excuse. Maybe Ryan was confused. Maybe he had crossed lines but hadn't fully committed to losing me. Maybe he was weak, selfish, stupid, but not cruel. That message destroyed every version of him I had been trying to protect. This wasn't an affair that spiraled out of control. It wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. It was a plan, a future they had discussed together, a future built with my money, my trust, my home, and my blind belief that the man I loved was still on my side. Apparently, I wasn't even part of it. I left work early and told my manager I wasn't feeling well. That was the first honest thing I'd said all day. By the time I got home, the apartment was empty. Ryan wouldn't be back for hours. I walked through each room slowly, looking at the couch we'd picked together, the framed vacation photos, the wedding invitations stacked on the dining table. Everything suddenly looked staged, like evidence from a relationship that had already died without telling me. I stopped in front of one of our engagement photos. Ryan's arm was around my waist. We were both smiling. For the first time, I wondered whether he had already been talking to Ashley when he proposed, whether he had already pictured a future with her while asking me to build one with him. None of the possible answers made it hurt less. That night, Ryan came home with takeout from my favorite restaurant. "Long day?" he asked. I nodded. "You?" He smiled. "Busy. Wedding stuff." Wedding stuff. A month earlier, I would have pictured seating charts and flower arrangements, Ashley, hotel rooms, a future that didn't include me. We ate together and talked about seating charts, centerpieces, and guest lists while I replayed his messages in my head. Every smile looked rehearsed. Every affectionate gesture felt borrowed. At one point, he reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I can't believe we're almost there." I looked at him, genuinely unsure which version of there he meant. "The wedding, or the divorce." I forced a small smile. "Yeah." That was all I trusted myself to say. Over the next 2 weeks, the investigator kept working, and the evidence kept coming. Every report brought the same thing: another hotel visit, another private lunch, another lie Ryan expected me to believe. At some point, I stopped feeling shocked every time a new report arrived. Ryan would tell me he was helping a friend, and a few hours later, I'd receive a photo of his car outside Ashley's apartment. He'd mention a work meeting, and the investigator would send a receipt from a restaurant across town. He'd claim he was running errands, and I'd get photographs of him walking into another hotel. The pattern became so predictable that I often knew the truth before opening the report. The heartbreak never disappeared, but it changed. The panic faded first. After that, the constant confusion started disappearing too. What remained was clarity, and clarity can be surprisingly cold. About 3 weeks before the rehearsal dinner, Ryan and Ashley came over to finalize wedding plans. At least that was the official reason. I sat across from them at the dining table with vendor invoices spread in front of me, pretending to review numbers while quietly watching them interact. Ashley finished telling a story, and Ryan laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. She touched his shoulder. A second later, he touched hers. The exchange lasted no more than a couple of seconds, but it carried the kind of familiarity that doesn't need words. What really caught my attention wasn't the touch. It was the way Ashley looked at him afterward. I knew that look. Years earlier, I'd looked at Ryan the exact same way. That was when something clicked. They weren't being careful anymore. Maybe they thought they had hidden it long enough. Maybe they thought I would never leave. Maybe they simply stopped trying. Whatever the reason, neither of them seemed worried about what I might notice. That realization stayed with me long after Ashley left. Later that night, Ryan fell asleep on the couch in front of the television while I sat in my office reviewing another report from the investigator. The evidence folder had grown massive. It contained photographs, timestamps, receipts, screenshots, locations, and a detailed timeline of everything that had happened over the previous months. Looking through it felt less like reading about an affair and more like reviewing a case file. A case file that happened to be my life. As I reviewed the rehearsal dinner itinerary, my eyes landed on the projector and the giant screen every guest would be watching. The idea came almost immediately. I rejected it just as quickly. I wasn't vindictive. I wasn't the kind of person who wanted public revenge. At least that's what I kept telling myself. But the idea refused to disappear. Every time I remembered Ryan calling me unreasonable, every time I remembered him dismissing my concerns, every time I remembered him forcing me to accept Ashley's place in our wedding, or lose the relationship entirely, the idea became harder to ignore. Eventually, I opened my laptop and created a new presentation. One slide became 3. 3 became 10. Before long, I was organizing photographs, screenshots, hotel records, and text messages into a timeline that told the complete story. Not my story. Theirs. I wasn't interested in humiliating anyone. I wanted people to see the truth exactly as it happened. Facts have a way of speaking for themselves when they're placed in the right order. By the time I finished the first draft, it was after midnight. I kept working, adding timestamps, organizing screenshots, double-checking dates. When I finally leaned back in my chair, exhausted, I stared at the presentation for a long time. The woman reflected in the dark screen looked calmer and harder than the one who had hired a private investigator only weeks earlier. Ryan and Ashley had spent months planning a future behind my back. I was simply making sure their future arrived in front of witnesses. The week leading up to the rehearsal dinner was strangely peaceful. Ryan seemed happier than he'd been in months. The closer we got to the wedding, the more relaxed he became. He carried himself like someone who had already crossed the finish line. Meanwhile, my anxiety slowly disappeared. Every new report confirmed the same thing. Ryan wasn't confused. He wasn't torn between two women. He wasn't struggling with unresolved feelings. He had made his choice a long time ago. He simply assumed I would never make mine. A few days before the rehearsal dinner, he found me working on the slideshow in the home office. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Finishing the slideshow." His face lit up. "Oh, good. I've been looking forward to seeing it." He stepped behind my chair and wrapped his arms around my shoulders. Months earlier, that gesture would have made me smile. This time I focused on keeping my expression neutral. "I'm excited to see what you came up with," he said. I looked up at him. "I think you'll remember it for a very long time." He laughed and kissed the top of my head. "That's what I'm hoping." After he left the room, I waited until I heard the bedroom door close before opening the final version. The presentation contained everything. Every slide told the same story. Months of meetings, secret hotel visits, hidden messages, and lies that had become impossible to explain away. Each slide led naturally to the next, creating a timeline that became impossible to explain away. I wasn't planning to scream. I wasn't planning to make accusations. The evidence would do all the work for me. The rehearsal dinner arrived on a Friday evening. 53 guests filled the private dining room. Family members, close friends. The wedding party. People who genuinely believed they were celebrating a love story. The room looked beautiful. White tablecloths covered every table, candles flickered softly under the lights, and glasses sparkled across the room. To an outsider, everything would have looked perfect. I stood near the entrance, greeting guests, while wondering how many of them would still be smiling an hour later. My parents arrived first. My father hugged me a little longer than usual. "Everything okay?" he asked quietly. I smiled. "Everything's fine." It wasn't. But the truth could wait a little longer. Ryan arrived shortly afterward. Ashley walked in beside him. Not behind him. Beside him. The image alone told a story. They were laughing about something as they entered the room. Ashley touched his arm. Ryan grinned. Neither of them seemed concerned about appearances anymore. Throughout dinner, the same pattern continued. Every conversation drifted back toward the two of them. Every joke came with shared history. Every glance carried a level of comfort that looked far too familiar. At one point, Ashley leaned close and whispered something into Ryan's ear. He laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. A few guests laughed with him. I simply watched. Months ago, I would have felt jealous. Now I felt validated. Watching them together erased every remaining doubt. Across the room, my mother noticed the look on my face. She gave me a questioning glance. I nodded once. Soon, dinner continued. Appetizers came and went. Speeches followed. Ryan's father spoke about commitment. My father talked about trust. Friends shared stories from our relationship. Listening to them became increasingly difficult because every word was sincere. These people truly believed they were celebrating something real. Only 3 people in that room knew the truth. Ryan, Ashley, and me. Eventually, Ryan's mother stood and tapped her glass. I think it's time for the slideshow. Several guests applauded. Ryan smiled proudly. Claire spent weeks working on this. I met his eyes. You have no idea. The projector screen lowered. The lights dimmed. The room settled into silence. Exactly as planned. The first slides showed our early years together. Our first date, family holidays, road trips, beach vacations. The reaction was exactly what you'd expect. Laughter, smiles, a few emotional tears. Ryan reached over and took my hand. I let him. Ryan squeezed my hand and smiled at the screen. It was the last time he'd smile that night. The first 20 slides played exactly the way everyone expected. Photos from our relationship filled the screen. Family vacations, birthday celebrations, weekend trips. The kind of memories people save because they believe they'll matter forever. Guests laughed at old stories. A few people wiped away tears. Ryan relaxed beside me, clearly convinced the evening was going perfectly. Then, slide 21 appeared. A photograph of Ryan's car parked outside Ashley's apartment. The timestamp sat clearly in the corner. A few confused murmurs moved through the room. Ryan frowned. Slide 22 followed. His car was still there more than 3 hours later. People shifted in their seats. Ryan's smile disappeared. The next slide showed Ryan and Ashley at a coffee shop. Their hands rested together across the table. Nobody laughed this time. The room grew noticeably quieter. "What is that?" someone whispered. The slideshow continued. The images kept coming: hotel garages, lobby entrances, secret meetings, and lies Ryan had repeated so often he probably believed them himself. Each photo was paired with whatever excuse Ryan had given me at the time: helping his cousin, meeting a friend, running errands, work dinners. Seeing them side by side made the lies impossible to defend. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Ryan stood up abruptly. "Turn it off." Nobody moved. Ashley had gone pale. The next slide appeared, a screenshot of their messages. The room became so quiet I could hear the projector humming. The first message filled the screen. "Can't wait until this wedding is over." Several people looked toward Ryan. The second appeared. 2 more months, then everything gets easier." Someone near the back let out a small gasp. The final exchange arrived. "And Claire?" Ryan's response appeared underneath. "She'll be fine. Once the divorce settlement happens, we'll have enough to start over." This time the reaction wasn't a gasp. It was silence. Complete silence. The kind that settles over a room when everyone realizes they've just witnessed something they can't unsee. Ryan's mother covered her mouth. My aunt looked physically ill. One of the bridesmaids stood up and walked out. Ashley opened her mouth twice as if she wanted to defend herself, but every explanation seemed to die before it reached her lips. Ryan looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time all evening. "Claire, what the hell is this?" I looked back at him calmly. "The truth. You hired someone to follow me?" His response surprised several people. Not because it was shocking, because it wasn't an apology. It wasn't denial. It wasn't remorse. He was still trying to make himself the victim. "You spent months planning a future with another woman while asking me to marry you." Ryan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Ashley finally stood. "This isn't fair." I turned toward her. "Then explain it." Nobody interrupted. Nobody defended her. The room waited. Ashley looked around at the guests, at Ryan, at his parents, and finally back at me. Then she lowered her eyes. That silence answered the question better than any explanation could have. Ryan tried again. "You're taking everything out of context." His father leaned forward. "What context?" Ryan didn't answer. His father repeated himself. "What possible context makes those messages acceptable?" The room stayed silent. Ryan looked down. His mother started crying. "Tell me this isn't true." Ryan couldn't. Watching her realize that was one of the hardest parts of the night. I reached into my purse and removed my engagement ring. The room fell silent again. I placed it gently on the table. No dramatic speech, no scene. Just a quiet acknowledgement that the future attached to that ring no longer existed. Ryan stared at it. "Claire." I shook my head. "No. Please let me explain. If there was something worth explaining, you had months to do it." For the first time all night, he looked genuinely afraid. Not afraid of losing me. Afraid of losing control of the situation. My father stood and walked over beside me. "You don't owe anyone another explanation," he said. I nearly broke down hearing that. Not because of Ryan, because it was the first time in weeks someone had reminded me I didn't have to carry this alone. A few moments later, Ryan's father stood as well. He looked exhausted, older than he had an hour earlier. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Claire, if I'd known even half of this, I would have told you not to marry him." The room turned toward him. "What my son did was wrong." Ryan looked stunned. His father continued. "And the fact that you're still defending it makes it worse." Nobody argued. Nobody could. A few minutes later, guests began leaving. Some hugged me. Some apologized. Others simply shook their heads and walked out. The wedding had ended long before the ceremony ever began. Everyone just knew it now. As I picked up my coat, Ryan stopped me one last time. What happens now? I looked at him, at Ashley, at the room that had been booked to celebrate a marriage that would never happen. What happens now, I said quietly, is that you live with your choices. Then I left. The days afterward were surprisingly difficult. People assume the hardest part is discovering the betrayal. It isn't. The hardest part is rebuilding your life after you've finally accepted it. There were vendors to call, contracts to cancel, deposits to sort through, relatives to update, and endless conversations I didn't want to have. Ryan reached out repeatedly. Texts, calls, emails, messages through friends. At first, I ignored everything. Eventually, the attempts slowed down. The fallout didn't. Word spread quickly, more quickly than Ryan expected. By the end of the week, almost everyone knew what had happened. The slideshow had left very little room for alternative explanations. A few weeks later, Ryan's sister called. He wants to talk to you. I sighed. About what? He's not doing well. I stared out the window. Neither of us said what we were both thinking. That he hadn't seemed particularly concerned about how I was doing when he was planning a future with Ashley. There isn't anything left to discuss. People make mistakes. Missing an exit is a mistake, I said. Planning to divorce someone for money isn't. She didn't argue after that. About 3 weeks later, there was a knock on my apartment door. When I looked through the peephole, Ryan was standing there. He looked thinner, tired, like someone who hadn't slept much. What do you want? I asked through the door. Please. Just one word. Eventually, I opened the door halfway. Not because I wanted reconciliation, because I wanted closure. Ryan looked at me for several seconds. I messed up. The understatement would have been funny under different circumstances. You think? He nodded. I never stopped loving you. I studied him carefully. Maybe he believed that. Maybe that was the tragedy. Because love without loyalty doesn't mean much. You don't do that to someone you love. Maybe you love the version of me that trusted you. Ryan looked confused. You didn't love the person you were hurting. Ryan lowered his eyes. I continued. You don't lie to them. Silence. You don't humiliate them. Still silence. You don't build a future with someone else while asking them to plan a wedding. His eyes filled with tears. I lost everything. I looked at him for a long moment. No, he frowned. You didn't lose everything. I stepped back slightly. You traded it. The words hit harder than anything else I'd said. Because they were true. Nobody forced Ryan into any of it. Every decision had been his, and those decisions eventually led him right here. After a long silence, he said quietly, If I could go back, I'd choose you. I looked at him. You already did go back. His brow furrowed. Every time you chose Ashley. That was the first moment all evening when he had absolutely nothing to say. Eventually, he nodded. I'm sorry. This time I believed him. The problem was that believing him didn't change anything. I know, I said softly. I closed the door and watched from the window as he walked back to his car alone. Months have passed since then. The apartment feels different now. Lighter. I've traveled more. Spent more time with friends. Picked up hobbies I abandoned while trying to hold together a relationship that only one person was fighting for. The biggest lesson wasn't about betrayal. It was about trusting myself. The signs had been there long before the evidence arrived. I saw them. I just didn't want to believe what they meant. People sometimes ask whether I regret exposing everything publicly. Maybe walking away quietly would have been easier. Maybe it would have been cleaner. But every time I think about those messages, the lies, and the way Ryan made me feel unreasonable for noticing obvious red flags, I reach the same conclusion. The wedding didn't end because I exposed the truth. It ended the day Ryan decided I would never find it. Losing Ryan felt devastating at the time. Looking back, marrying him would have been worse.